Welcome to a special edition of Counterpoints. I'm Melinda Nusafora. We're bringing you an exclusive interview on this episode as we strive to put these uncertain times into some sort of global context. The 2025 Global Peace Index found there are 59 active state-based conflicts currently raging, the most since the end of World War II. Almost 80 countries are engaged in conflicts beyond their own borders, a worrying indication of geopolitical fragmentation. So to analyse how we got here and, perhaps more importantly, to advise how best we can move forward, I am honoured to say we're joined by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, world-renowned economics professor and thinker who serves as Director of the Centre for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. Professor Sachs, welcome to Counterpoints.
My great delight. Thank you so much.
I want to begin on the bigger picture to start off our conversation. You've spoken and written at length about our new multipolar world order. How significant is this redistribution of power that we're witnessing?
Very significant. What's happening now is a once-in-many-century event, actually. The Western-led world, the European imperial world, followed by the U.S. imperial world, has basically become a truly multipolar world in the last quarter century. By that, I mean that a world that was dominated by Europe and the United States for centuries is now a world in which China, India, the Gulf countries, even Africa getting its act together with the African Union, is becoming a world in which power is dispersed, in which many parts of the world are achieving rapid economic progress, and in which, therefore, the geopolitical pecking order, if you will, is changing enormously. Not every country understands this well. My own, the United States, lives anachronistically. It tends to think a little bit in the past that this is still the U.S.-led world, that the President of the United States can bark orders, demand this of Russia, demand this of China, demand this of India, demand this of Brazil, but it doesn't work that way anymore. So we have entered multipolarity, several great powers, many regional powers. We don't have an exclusive hold by one or two or three countries on the leading technologies, though it is true that the U.S. and China tend to dominate still on the innovation side, but technologies are being used worldwide, countries are catching up, and the geopolitical order is therefore changing.
How do you think the US has maybe reacted or fallen into line with this redistribution?
The US lives in the past. It believes in its heart of hearts, and when I say the U.S., I mean the political class, I mean Washington, thinks the U.S. still runs the show. President Trump, for example, believes that the U.S. market is the be-all and end-all of the world economy, and so it's his leverage point for everything, based on access to the U.S. market that he individually grants or deprives other countries of. He thinks that he can get his way geopolitically. He's coming step by step to understand it doesn't quite work that way. When he imposed punitive tariffs on China, China said, okay, we'll match you and we'll slow the export of rare earths, materials, magnets, and so forth, nearly bringing the U.S. auto industry to a standstill. The U.S. quickly blinked and backed down from that confrontation. Now the U.S. has punitively put an extra 25% tariffs on India. India announced soon afterwards, well, it's canceling military orders from the United States, and Prime Minister Modi is meeting with President Xi Jinping shortly. The world is a much more interesting place than the Truth Social blasts would lead us to believe.
How successful, or maybe unsuccessful, do you think this redistribution has been on a global scale? And what kind of challenges lie ahead as international powers recalibrate to it?
The rhetoric that I use is that we have arrived at multipolarity, but not at multilateralism. And the distinction that I'm trying to make is that multipolarity means that power is dispersed in a number of places, but multilateralism means we have rules of the road, we have an understanding, we have international law. This is not working right now. In fact, as this multipolarity has spread, I would say that the effectiveness of the United Nations has diminished. And I work at the United Nations. I love the United Nations. I think the UN is critical for the world's future, but it's paralyzed. The U.S. vetoes what it doesn't like. The UN itself is struck by the U.S. non-payment of dues, and not just the U.S., other countries as well, even though the budget is tiny by any standard of comparison or relative to what the UN should be having as its budget in order to carry out its functions.
Do you think it needs a restructure in that case? Is it still fit for purpose? Or does it need to be scrapped and start again?
Well, we don't need to scrap it, but I think that the right description is UN 2.0. This is the 80th anniversary of the UN. We need an upgrade. It's time for a new model. Not scrapping things. By the way, if we scrap things, they're not going to be rebuilt right now. The U.S. is not in a building mode at all. It is in a tearing down mode. But we have an effective base, but we don't have the details right. We need to reform the UN Security Council. We need to change the veto. We need to change the funding of the UN. We need to actually change the locations of the UN. Yes, headquarters could stay on the East River, but there should be a major campus in China. There should be a major campus in India. There could be a major campus in Riyadh. There could be a major campus in Africa. This is a worldwide organization, after all. We're not in the US-led world anymore. So
elaborate on that for us. Why do you think that there should be a UN campus, say in Riyadh, say in China? How would that improve the current situation?
Two things. One is that it would give a sense of local ownership and responsibility to this multilateral international venture. Right now, I love the fact that the UN is a few blocks from my house in New York City. But the truth is that people in China should say, yeah, of course we have the UN. We have a major center. I'm advocating a major center on climate and the energy transition in China, because China's leading on that. Each region of the world should feel, yes, we have a piece of this. This is our institution. It's not a U.S. preserve. The U.S. was the creator of the UN, no doubt. Franklin Roosevelt, I'd give him, more than 50% of the overall credit. He was a genius. He was our greatest leader. But now in a multipolar world, we actually need a multi-campus UN as well, in my view. The second reason is the U.S. should not be able to dictate terms anymore. It tries to, but it can't really. The U.S. is 4.1% of the world population. The U.S. is about 12% of the world trading system. The U.S. is maybe 14% of world output measured at so-called purchasing power prices. It's not enough to lead the world. It's not enough to claim to lead the world.
So do you think then that the centre of gravity is shifting, economically at least, maybe diplomatically? Is it shifting eastwards, towards Asia, towards the Middle East, in that sort of regard?
The center of gravity of the world population and the world economy for millennia was Asia. Asia had 60 to 70% of the world population and roughly a comparable share of the world economy. And that was true as recently as the beginning of the 19th century, say the year 1800. It was the Industrial Revolution and these recent 2 centuries that changed that, especially from 1800 to 1950. Asia went into a steep absolute and relative decline. Absolute because Asia became colonized by Britain across the Gulf region, across Central Asia, across India, the Indian subcontinent. China was brought effectively under European imperial threat or actual control on the coastline. Very few countries resisted the European industrial imperialism. To my count, that came to an end at the end of World War II. Europe was exhausted by 2 world wars. It did not have the moral, financial, economic, military, or technological capacity to maintain its imperialism. But the United States partly took over. And so the U.S. tried to maintain this. It became called Western dominance, not European imperialism. And the U.S. led that roughly until the year 2000. Now we're really multipolar. I think we can thank China for the biggest breakthrough that occurred. This giant, Napoleon said, when China awakes, the world, the world will know it. And the world knew it. This is the single biggest geopolitical change in the world. But it's not just China. It's all over the world. Every place I travel, and that's nonstop traveling, countries are at the cutting edge of technology right now. They're thinking very creatively. They're incorporating robotics, AI. I took a wonderful tour in Dubai recently of all of the AI advances in Dubai. But you'd find that in many places in the world. This is now really a world community, not dominated by any one place or any one country, but we don't have the mindset yet, the rules of the road, the self-restraint. I start with my own country. I want the U.S. to respect Russia, to respect China, to stop making threats, and to stop thinking that the U.S. can call the shots.
You have said that we are living in times of extraordinary instability and extraordinary danger. To your mind, who or what is to blame for that?
There are several things that are happening. We're in an age of generalized disruption. First is the geopolitical change that I've just said. Second is the technological revolutions that are interconnected but distinct. We have the nuclear age, we've had the biotechnology revolution, we have the AI revolution. Each of these are technologies of enormous power for good and enormous potential for destruction as well. I happen to think it would take us in a long digression, but I happen to believe on the basis of extensive evidence that the COVID pandemic came out of a laboratory. I actually think it came out of an American laboratory, but that's a long story. But that it was a bioengineered virus. Let me put it this way. I think the evidence is quite strong on that, but even if it's not true, it could have come out of a lab because we have technologies now that are so powerful that you can make worldwide pathogens. Who controls that? Nobody. Don't believe it's under control. So that's another reason for massive destabilization, is the technological destabilization. And when the U.S. Soviet so-called bipolar world created, it wasn't stable and it wasn't peaceful because there were wars all over the periphery, let's say, not between the two countries directly, but there was a certain structure to the world, happy or unhappy, it was structured. There's a lot less structure now. There are 9 nuclear-armed countries in the world. That's a lot. the relations among them are not good. They're not clear. And the nuclear arms control framework has broken down, by the way. The United States led the breakdown. It abandoned one of the pillars of that framework in 2002 when it unilaterally walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty. So we don't have a shared understanding of the scene right now. And then in Washington, I have to be clear and truthful about it. The United States talks as if Russia and China are just open enemies. This is a horrendously wrong idea.
I'm going to come to Russia and China a bit more specifically further in our conversation. But before we get there, I want to turn our attentions to the Middle East. You don't have to...
Could I mention one more factor before we get there?
Sure.
Because I shouldn't forget it, and it's what I do for a daily life, and that's the environmental crisis. The environmental crisis is a side effect of the economic success of the last 2 centuries. We use resources to an extent that's absolutely unimaginable, hundreds-fold compared to 2 centuries ago. And it turned out, bad luck, really bad luck, that carbon dioxide, which comes from burning fossil fuels, of course, has what we call quantum mechanical properties of absorbing heat, of absorbing infrared radiation, and therefore contributing to global warming. It's just a chemical fact. It's not an ideological fact. It's a chemical fact. So we have massive environmental crises: water, heat waves, droughts, floods, rising sea levels, biodiversity loss. Oh my God, how many governments are really prepared for that?
It does create a very unstable time.
Zero is a little bit of an exception, but they're not ready for this. The U.S. is in denial. Many other governments are in denial. So this is just another factor of disruption, because you have these super sophisticated societies, and then suddenly nature shows, oh, you're not so sophisticated as you think. Look at the pictures in the recent days of Hong Kong in massive flooding, because they had a torrential rainfall that is unexperienced for, I think it's, for more than a century. And that's because warming waters add to convection and add to precipitation. And this is happening all over the world. So this is another matter of disruption. Now, if we were smart, we'd all sit down and say, God, these wars are so stupid. We better focus on cooperating on the areas of real danger to us. But unfortunately, politics is not so rational.
Politics gets in the way. If we turn our minds to Israel, Gaza, making headlines, unfortunately, on a daily basis, we're hearing a fair bit in the previous days of international condemnation of Israel's new plan to occupy Gaza, but not really seeing a lot of action. How would you characterize the current situation and the world's reaction to it?
Well, Israel is a rogue state. It's committing a genocide before our eyes. 2 million people are being starved right now, and it absolutely has to stop. One reason it doesn't stop is that the United States is utterly complicit in this. The United States finances Israel, the United States arms Israel, and the United States blocks action in the UN Security Council. So this is a U.S.-Israel operation. Intolerable, illegal, profoundly evil in its ways, because it's killing tens of thousands of people before our eyes. Now, what to do? What to do with this new announcement that Israel is going to occupy Gaza is, I would hope, that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France, as the co-conveners of the implementation of the two-state solution, which reported out to the UN General Assembly at the end of July, together, that's President Macron, the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, would together say this is unacceptable and it's not going to happen. It would tell the United States, you cannot be complicit in this. Israel must not move. This would not be an unpopular opinion. All over the world, there's condemnation. But we must move directly to the implementation of the two-state solution now, and no more of Israel's genocidal actions or occupation and so on. So condemnation is not enough. We need a clear set of actions. I do believe that France and Saudi Arabia should take the lead on this because they're the co-chairs of implementing the two-state solution.
Undoubtedly, though, when it gets to the floor of the UN, the US is going to do what it's always done and veto any vote on the establishment of a Palestinian state. Why do you think? Why does the US insist on that veto? What's behind it?
Well, I think there are two issues. One, the vote should only be in the UN General Assembly right now. The US does not have a veto. A vote in the General Assembly would show that 185 of the 193 member states of the UN, with a population of 95% of the world, is calling for immediate action and that Israel must not occupy the General Assembly. So the Security Council should consider it, but this is a matter for the UN General Assembly where the U.S. does not have a veto. I would suggest that the Arab League have a practical plan. We will put in security. We will take the emergency relief operations underway. We will take the hostages from Hamas so that they are in safety. We will demand that Israel release the 3,000 plus hostages that it has in administrative detention, no less than that. So I think that the Arab League should actually step forward in a very practical, operational way right now and make clear that the Arab League will support the Palestinian Authority to take the responsibility in Gaza and that Israel must get out of this because genocide is enough. We've seen enough, no more. And the condemnations now need to be followed by a practical action, and the United States needs to be told in no uncertain terms, no, you are not going to be complicit in Israel's occupation of Gaza. I believe that this can work. Now, why does the U.S. do this? I have to tell you, I've watched this for decades. It is a mystery, to some extent, why the U.S. is so controlled, it seems, by the Israel agenda. Of course, there are many answers that are given. One is the Israel lobby, is AIPAC, is the big money involved in campaign contributions. No doubt, part of that's true. Part of it is the uniqueness of 45 or 50 million American Protestant evangelicals who base their foreign policy ideas on biblical lines, obscure and more than 2,000 years old. This is true of America, very strange, but absolutely true. There are multiple claims that many American leaders are blackmailed. This is the whole Epstein fury. Who knows? But it's not far-fetched. We know that the CIA and Mossad has worked closely together for decades. For decades. This is not a new relationship. But I tell you, even if you follow this hour to hour, day by day, it is a bit of a mystery because we have a genocide underway. And even with all of this, America should be able to figure out, no more. This is intolerable. This goes far beyond anything remotely acceptable. And the fact of the matter is the American people have figured this out. They used to be very pro-Israel. Now they're pro-Palestinian, roughly by a 2-to-1 ratio. But the political class still hones to this give Netanyahu anything agenda. But the whole rest of the world has moved beyond this.
But they've moved beyond it maybe in words, but when we see how diplomacy has failed to negotiate a ceasefire on this, you've spoken about why maybe America is hamstrung, but on a global scale, why are Israel's traditional allies also hamstrung? Why does the Western world in particular seem powerless to put some actual actions into the words that they've been saying?
Well, don't depend on the so-called West. This is the first point. The West, as I've said, is experiencing the end of its centuries of domination. Psychologically, the U.S. is in the worst shape because it's the most unrealistic, but Europe is in bad shape also. Now, it's true. Even in Europe, we're seeing, in Britain, amazingly, in Germany, which said it won't send military to Israel that could be used in Gaza. Of course, in France, saying that they'll recognize the state of Palestine. We're seeing some glimmers, but we're past the Western world. It's time, really, honestly, with all respect for the Arab world, to lead right now on this issue. And for the Arab countries led by Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia clearly has the geopolitical lead on the Palestinian issue right now, to say no occupation. And to mobilize France for that, because France is the co-chair of this implementation, mobilize the UN operations, mobilize the UN General Assembly. But also, one thing that's needed in politics is a specific plan of action. Here is what's going to happen this week, next week, the next week, the next week. This cannot be left to the U.S. This can't be left to anybody. It has to be proposed now. I would say, starting with the KSA, but really with the Arab League. This is an Arab responsibility for Gaza. We will help to stabilize the situation. Israel must leave, according to the voice of the international community, the International Court of Justice, and basic human truth and decency. Get out and stop starving 2 million people.
Just a few days ago, I spoke to a senior Hamas official on this program, and he rejected calls for Hamas to disarm, given the current humanitarian situation there. Do you think Hamas should disarm and leave Gaza in order to execute a ceasefire deal that has been on the table for far too long now?
I think that Hamas should disarm and leave Gaza in the context of implementing the two-state solution unambiguously, with Gaza being taken over in security terms by an Arab group under the Arab League in support of the Palestinian Authority. Yes, but not just a U.S. ceasefire. U.S. is so dishonest. It is the most dishonest broker in this. It has nothing but Israel in its intentions. So for Hamas to say, well, no, that doesn't make sense, that makes sense. But if the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation say to Hamas, we are implementing the two-state solution and we are ending the Israeli detention of more than 3,000 people in administrative detention, and we are taking over the humanitarian aid, not this murderous operation of the U.S., which is not humanitarian, it is murder at these food points. We're doing it as the Arab League. We are doing it as the OIC. Then I would say, yes, this is the right answer, because then we're going to have a solution to this issue that's a real solution, not an American phony solution, not an Israeli dominance solution.
If we turn our attentions, unfortunately, to the other global conflict that we report on daily, Russia-Ukraine, the stage is set for a meeting between US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart. Should we expect some sort of breakthrough, especially when you bear in mind this back and forth relationship we've seen between President Trump scolding President Zelensky, befriending Putin, and now back and forth? How do you see this playing out?
What's happening, I think, it's very confusing, but what's happening is I think that Trump and part of the American political class would like to end the war, stop the NATO enlargement, stop the provocations that led to this war. And another part of the American political class, the CIA, the military-industrial complex, most of the Congress, would like to continue the war. And Trump's job as a president is to lead. But he hasn't led. He's been like that twisting weather vane. Like you say, some weeks it looks good, other weeks it looks bad. A president of the United States has the major job of leading. What we miss in the United States is any public politics about this. Trump says nothing to the American people. He explains nothing. And vis-a-vis Russia, I know privately they say, yeah, NATO's a provocation, but publicly they don't say that. It's just like Gaza. When the United States doesn't say two states, okay, then you know that they're not going to be able to settle anything. And in Ukraine, until President Trump says publicly, NATO will not enlarge, this war will continue. Well, he doesn't want to say it. There's a political cost to it. But damn it, if I may say so, that's his job. That's the job of a president, to stand up and explain what's really needed. The way to end this war is to say publicly, NATO enlargement was a mistake. It was a provocation. It was a threat to Russia's security. By the way, not just from Russia's perspective, exactly if Russia said, we're going to set up a military base in Mexico, the United States would say no. So the U.S. saying, we're going to set up a military base in Ukraine, of course Russia says no. So the job of the president is to be clear on this. Trump, for whatever reason, because he doesn't understand it or because of the constellation of politics around him, has not been clear. Now, there's this meeting coming up. Who knows? I hope that the meeting is based on Stephen Witkoff having said to President Putin, we understand that we're going to get to the root cause of this, and then President Putin saying, okay, then we'll have a meeting. I hope that's what's happened. We'll find out soon enough.
President Trump continues to threaten these sanctions against Russia. Can sanctions on Moscow ever work? And have they been an effective lever so far in this conflict?
They will not work. They will drive the BRICS countries closer together. They will, yes, divide the world. They will boomerang on everybody. The sanctions not only do not work, they're a lose-lose proposition for the world, because trade is actually a good thing. Europe is the biggest loser, by the way, not Russia. Europe pays multiples for its energy, carried as LNG from the United States, for God's sake, because the U.S. blew up a pipeline of cheap gas coming from Russia. Okay, this is ridiculous. And Europe let that happen for its misconceived geopolitical reasons. But in any event, these sanctions cannot work.
All right, let's keep your economist hat on. Let's talk tariffs then, in the US in particular. Will President Trump's tariffs make America rich again?
No. And if one looks at all of the claims and all of the statements about rebuilding American manufacturing employment in the U.S. has been flat for a decade. And it's going to go down because of AI, because the factories are becoming robotic, AI-driven factories everywhere in the world. I was just in a cutting-edge factory in China in the solar sector, It was a massive, massive operation. There were almost no workers in it. It was robots the entire way and AI systems monitoring the process with a few dozen workers scattered in this massive cavernous factory. So Trump's idea that he's going to solve an employment problem or recreate jobs, the jobs aren't in China. They're nowhere right now. They're robots. And what Trump is doing is disrupting the existing supply chains that exist. America's not going to be a great shipbuilding industry in the future. By the way, America under Trump is committing a kind of suicide in the auto sector because China's already the world leader in electric vehicles for the next decade to come. And Trump says, I have no interest in that sector. Well, that's the future of the automotive sector, and Trump is uninterested in it. So none of this is really going to work. It's just disruption.
All right, so we've talked Russia sanctions and a little bit on US tariffs. If we flick our minds back to Russia, you've said that this conflict could have been avoided multiple times. What do you think was the biggest missed opportunity here?
Well, the biggest single missed opportunity was April 2022, because there was a draft agreement on the table. One can even find it online. It still had some contested points, but the U.S. swooped in and told the Ukrainians, don't sign that, fight on. We've got your back. Don't accept neutrality. So that was the most immediate moment when the treaty was right there to end the war. But you can go back step by step by step. In December 2021, President Putin, on the 15th of December 2021, put on the table a draft U.S.-Russia security agreement. I spoke to the White House at that point. I said, negotiate. This is a good agreement. It was based on NATO non-enlargement. They wouldn't negotiate. Missed opportunity. If you go back 4 years before that, there was the Minsk II agreement. The idea of the Minsk II agreement is end the conflict by giving autonomy, not territorial sovereignty or annexation to Russia, but just autonomy within Ukraine to the eastern Donbas region, to Donetsk and Lugansk. The U.S. wouldn't support it. It told Ukraine, ignore it, even though it was a treaty that Ukraine had signed and that was backed by the UN Security Council. Go back to February 2014. What is the U.S. doing helping to lead a coup against a president of Ukraine? Guaranteed trouble. They shouldn't have done that. Go back to 1994 when Bill Clinton got the very bad idea from his advisors and from the deep state to expand NATO all the way to Georgia and Ukraine. So this is a long-term project of the military-industrial complex gone awry. I have come to this cliche, which I find true. The U.S. plays poker, Russia plays chess, China plays Go. Poker is an interesting game. It's a series of short hands, and it's based on a lot of bluffing. And the U.S. has been bluffing all along, up until this week, that you must end unilateral ceasefire now. These are bluffs. This is poker playing. But the U.S. has had a terrible hand, and it's losing the pot.
We're almost out of time, but I just want to get in a couple of US questions before we wrap up, particularly about the White House. We've seen a lot of executive orders being signed in this administration, I think more than ever before.
By far.
What's your take on that? And is the US political system okay? Is it at risk?
No, it's broken completely. It's not a constitutional system. Trump's tariffs are the purview of Congress under Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Congress has the authority, the explicit and only authority, to levy duties. But Trump asserted that. There is a court case right now. The lower court said Trump does not have the authority just to declare an emergency and then remake the U.S. trading system. And now it's in the appellate court. And in the hearings in the appellate court a few days ago, the judges were very skeptical of the U.S. position, of the U.S. government position, that is the Trump position. So the appellate court is likely to rule that the whole Trump emergency decrees on tariffs is unconstitutional. Then it will go to the Supreme Court. This is really the crux of the matter. The Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of the U.S. Constitution. It is filled with the Trump appointees. Whether they hand over the keys of the kingdom to King Donald or not is really going to be the ultimate determinant of whether we maintain our constitutional order or not.
With that in mind, with who is pulling the strings, is the US becoming an oligarchy? Are we seeing rich tech bros front and center in the White House? Are they pulling the strings?
The U.S. Is an oligarchy. It's long been an oligarchy. It's just a question of which oligarchs. So in the 1950s, the famous expression was, what's good for General Motors is good for the United States. The auto industry was the big thing. I would say in the 1970s to 1990s, the U.S. oil industry was the dominant sector because that was American security. Because underlying oligarchy is the security issue always. Now, the security, according to the Pentagon, depends on AI systems. The Pentagon doesn't produce AI. The tech oligarchs produce AI. So the Pentagon is actually making mega contracts with Musk, with Peter Thiel, with all of the tech industry. In turn, the tech industry put Trump into the White House with its big financial backing. So this is the temporary oligarchy. But I think it's right. American politics was corrupted many decades ago. It's just an interesting question. Who are the main corruptors each period?
Well, if we, just to wrap up on the rich puppet masters, if we can call them that, your thoughts on should billionaires be allowed to exist?
Yeah, billionaires can be allowed to exist, of course, because they make big companies and they can have a constructive role in the world. But their wealth should become a part of the public patrimony in the following generations. We should not have built up dynasties which rule the world. And basically, the billionaires, some of them say they're going to give away half their wealth. What do you need? For the other 100 billion, you're going to keep it for yourself? No, thank you. So I think, first of all, we should have a system in which our age of abundance allows everybody to live decently. We don't have zakat in the United States. We have the poor are on their own. That's all. And that is a horrendous system. We don't have billionaires of responsibility. And what we certainly should not have is the government for sale. So you could have billionaires, but government's not for sale. The U.S. government's for sale. It should stop being for sale.
You've been incredibly generous with your time. We appreciate your illuminating responses. It's been a very interesting and candid interview. Thanks so much for joining us here on Counterpoints.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Jeffrey Sachs, world-renowned economics professor and thinker who serves as the director of the Center of Sustainable Development at Columbia University. Sir, thanks for joining us here on Counterpoints.
My great honor and pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for that special episode of Counterpoints for our exclusive one-on-one interview with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. You can, of course, follow us on YouTube, on social media, on X and on TikTok to follow all our latest debates. Thanks for your company.